The first sign of danger wasn't the shouting. It wasn't the sound of iron boots against the cobblestone. It was the candles. Between one breath and the next, the flames inside the tavern went perfectly still. Then, the heavy oak door shattered into splinters. The invaders came in like a storm. Warriors in dark leathers, carrying the scent of blood and rogue magic. Screams erupted. Patrons scrambled under tables. Even strong, ranked wolves dropped to their knees in pure terror, pressing their heads against the cold stone floor. But Sadie did not move. She stood exactly where she was, a nameless, unranked maid, still holding a clay pitcher in her scarred hands. She didn't run, because running was a luxury for those who had somewhere to go. Suddenly, the temperature in the room plummeted. The chaotic shouting of the invaders choked in their throats. A heavy, terrifying aura pressed down on the tavern, forcing the air out of everyone's lungs. Through the broken doorway stepped Alpha King Aiden, the supreme ruler, a man whose name alone won wars. His royal enforcers immediately moved to execute the invaders, but Aiden's silver eyes slowly scanned the room. He passed over the whimpering merchants. He ignored the begging mercenaries. His gaze stopped on the one person still standing, Sadie, a fragile maid in a worn, dusty dress, standing perfectly straight in a room full of kneeling wolves. He took a slow step toward her. The sheer force of his alpha aura was enough to crush a normal wolf's spine. Sadie locked her knees. Her hands trembled slightly, but she lifted her chin and met his stare. She didn't know it yet, but in a world governed by brutal power and royal bloodlines, her quiet defiance had just spoken louder than any magic. And the Alpha King had heard every single word. He stopped 3 feet away from her. Up close, he was taller, broader, with a face that looked like it had been carved from cold marble. His eyes were not angry. They were incredibly, deeply focused, observing her with the intensity of a predator who had just found something entirely unexpected. You did not drop to the floor. His voice was a low rumble, quiet but carrying across the dead silence of the tavern. "The floor is dirty, Your Majesty," Sadie replied. The entire tavern held its collective breath. One of the royal guards shifted his weight, clearly stunned by the disrespect. But Alpha King Aiden did not execute her. Instead, a faint, almost imperceptible shift happened in his grey eyes. It wasn't amusement. It was recognition. He looked at the heavy clay pitcher in her hands, noticing how tightly she held it, how her knuckles were white, how she was using it to ground herself, to keep from collapsing under the weight of his aura. "You have no wolf," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I am unranked," she said evenly, forcing her voice not to shake. "I have no pack, no title, and no wolf. I am just a maid. A maid who does not kneel when my soldiers break down a door," he said softly. "You did not ask anyone to kneel, my king. You only demanded silence. I was already silent." Aiden stared at her for 3 long seconds. In a world governed by brutal power, loud roaring, and magical bloodlines, her quiet defiance was the loudest thing he had ever heard. She was terrified. He could smell the faint spike of fear. But her dignity was an iron wall she refused to lower. He slowly reached out. Sadie flinched internally, but forced her feet to stay rooted. His large, calloused hand wrapped around the clay pitcher. Gently, without a shred of the violence he had brought into the room, he took it from her trembling hands and set it on the wooden table. "You are coming with us," he said. The spell of silence broke the moment Alpha King Aiden turned his back. With sharp, disciplined commands, the royal guards hauled Caven's disarmed enforcers out into the new night. The surviving tavern patrons wept, clutching each other as the suffocating pressure of the invasion finally lifted. Sadie did not weep. She smoothed the front of her coarse linen apron, letting the dust fall to the stone floor, and walked out of the shattered doorway. The night air of the Veldrath border was bitter, biting through the thin fabric of her dress. Around her, the village was in chaos. Torches flickered against the dark, illuminating the massive scale of the royal intervention. This was not a random patrol. The king had brought an army. Sadie shifted her weight, pressing her heel down just enough to feel the cold, reassuring shape of the small belt knife hidden inside her worn boot. It was a pathetic weapon against a kingdom of immortal wolves, but it was hers, and it meant she was not entirely helpless. "Keep moving, stay close to the wagons," a royal soldier instructed, his tone brisk but not cruel. It was a striking difference from the brutal shoving of Caven's men. Sadie complied, but her dark eyes were already mapping the courtyard. She counted the guards. She noted the rotation of the perimeter watch. She registered the insignia on the banners. She was constructing an exit strategy, filing away every detail with the cold precision of a woman who had spent her entire life surviving in the margins. "You are calculating the distance to the tree line." The voice came from the shadows, low and resonant, carrying that same unhurried certainty. Sadie stopped. Alpha King Aiden stepped into the moonlight. He had removed his heavy riding gloves, his large hands resting casually on the hilt of a broadsword at his waist. He wasn't radiating his crushing aura anymore, but his physical presence alone was a wall of pure authority. "I am observing my surroundings, Your Majesty," Sadie said quietly, keeping her gaze leveled at his chest, rather than submitting by looking at the ground. "Most unranked Omegas in a raid are entirely paralyzed by fear," Aiden said, stepping closer. The silver crown insignia at his collar caught the moonlight. "They cry, they beg, they look for an alpha to hide behind. You have done none of these things. In fact, you are currently calculating whether you can outrun my perimeter guards if you slip behind that supply cart." Sadie's breath hitched, but she quickly forced her heart rate to slow. He was entirely too observant. "Running requires a destination," she replied, her voice steady. "I have none. Therefore, running would be a tactical error." Aiden went completely still. It was that gathered, focused stillness she had noticed in the tavern. He tilted his head slightly, studying her face, not assessing her like a piece of livestock the way Caven's administrators did, but reading her, deciphering her. "What is your name?" he asked. "Sadie. I have no family name, no rank, no wolf signature." She laid out her flaws like a shield, expecting the usual dismissal. She expected him to lose interest, to realize she was genetically useless to his kind. But Aiden did not look away. And yet, Sadie, with no rank, you stood between an armed enforcer and a room full of kneeling wolves. Why? I had a pitcher of water in my hands, Sadie said, her expression perfectly blank. I did not want to spill it. For a fraction of a second, the corner of the Alpha King's mouth twitched. It was not a smile, but it was the ghost of one. The sheer audacity of her lie, delivered with such deadpan dignity, seemed to catch his wolf entirely off guard. I see, Aiden said softly. A tragedy averted, then. Before Sadie could formulate a response to his unexpected dry wit, a senior officer approached. The man wore the heavy armor of a royal commander, his face lined with battle scars. My king, the commander said, bowing slightly. The prisoners are secured. The local villagers are being directed to the medical tents. What should we do with the unranked females we intercepted from Caven's sweep? The standard procedure is to place them in the transport carts for processing at the local garrison. Sadie braced herself. Processing. Transport carts. It was a different system, but the words felt dangerously similar to captivity. Her hand twitched toward her boot. Aiden looked at Sadie. He saw the microscopic tightening of her jaw. He saw the defensive shift of her shoulder. Ruppings. He saw a woman who expected the world to treat her like garbage, preparing to endure it without a single tear. No, Aiden said, his voice dropping an octave, ringing with absolute finality. The commander blinked. Sire? She is not cargo to be processed, Aiden commanded, his silver eyes never leaving Sadie's face. The unranked women will be given blankets, hot food, and riding horses, not carts. As for her, he gestured slightly toward Sadie. She rides in my personal carriage. Sadie's eyes widened, her carefully constructed neutral mask slipping for the first time. Your Majesty, that is not necessary. I belong with the others. You do not belong to anyone, Sadie. Aiden interrupted gently, his words carrying a weight that made her chest tighten painfully. But you see things my soldiers do not. You understand Caven's sweeps. You are going to tell me exactly how a nameless maid knows how to think like a military general. He turned and walked toward the royal convoy, leaving no room for argument. Sadie stood in the cold moonlight, her heart pounding against her ribs. She had survived the raid, but as she looked at the heavy velvet curtains of the king's carriage, she realized the true danger had just begun. Alpha King Aiden did not just want to rescue her, he wanted the truth. The ride to the Crown garrison was agonizing, eerily silent. Alpha King Aiden sat across from Sadie in the spacious royal carriage, his large frame swaying easily with the motion of the wheels. He did not ask her any questions. He did not try to intimidate her. He simply sat in the shadows, his silver eyes resting on her with that same unnerving, complete attention. Sadie did not lean back against the plush velvet cushions. She sat rigidly on the edge of her seat, keeping her weight balanced over her boots. If the carriage stopped suddenly, she needed to be ready to move. She needed her hand close to the small blade hidden at her ankle. She was waiting for the catch. In her 23 years of life, powerful men did not offer comfortable carriage rides to unranked maids, unless they wanted something terrible in return. When the carriage finally rolled to a halt in the courtyard of the Crown garrison, Sadie exhaled a breath she didn't realize she was holding. The garrison was a massive fortress of grey stone and iron gates, built to withstand sieges. Currently, its main hall had been turned into a makeshift medical wing. The unranked women rescued from Caven's sweep were huddled in the center of the hall, clutching wool blankets. They were terrified. The royal soldiers were trying to hand out food and tend to wounds, but their sheer size and wolf blood were only making the situation worse. A heavy-set medical officer reached out to inspect a deep cut on a young woman's arm. The girl shrieked, scrambling backward until her spine hit the stone wall. Before the officer could step forward again, Sadie was there. She moved, with the quiet efficiency of someone used to navigating crowded, dangerous tavern floors. She stepped directly between the massive medical officer and the trembling girl. "Step back," Sadie said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the chaotic noise of the hall. The officer frowned, his wolf bristling at the command from a human-scented maid. "I need to clean that wound, girl. Move aside." "Your size is terrifying her," Sadie replied evenly, not yielding a single inch. "Your stance is aggressive. You smell like iron and adrenaline. If you touch her right now, her heart will give out." Sadie didn't wait for his permission. She turned her back to the armed soldier, a massive display of trust and dismissal, and knelt beside the panicking girl. "Look at me," Sadie whispered, keeping her voice low and steady. "I am Sadie. I was at the tavern. We are going to breathe together. Just you and me." Slowly, deliberately, Sadie took a roll of clean bandages from the stunned officer's tray. With gentle, practiced hands, she began to bind the girl's arm, murmuring soft instructions, shielding her from the intimidating gaze of the royal army. Within minutes, the girl stopped crying. The panic in the hall began to settle, anchored by the quiet, immovable presence of the maid in the dusty linen dress. Sadie moved from one woman to the next, organizing the distribution of bread, translating the healer's instructions, and establishing a perimeter of calm that no soldier dared to cross. Up on a second-floor balcony, Alpha King Aiden watched it all. He stood in the shadows, his hands resting on the stone railing. Beside him, Commander Corin let out a low whistle of disbelief. "Surprised. She has no wolf signature, sire," Corin murmured, staring down at Sadie. "But she just ordered my best medical officer to stand down, and he actually listened. She commands that room like a ranked Luna." Aiden's jaw tightened. "Thoughtful. Not a Luna," he said quietly. "A Luna commands through the pack bond, through genetics. She is doing it entirely with her mind. What do you want to do with her, my king? Shall I have her brought to the interrogation cells for questioning?" Aiden turned his head, shooting Corin a look so cold the commander immediately lowered his eyes. "She is not a prisoner, Corin," Aiden said, his voice laced with a dangerous edge. "She has spent her entire life being treated as disposable. If you put her in a cell, you will prove her right." Aiden looked back down at the hall. Sadie was wiping blood off her hands with a damp cloth, her spine still perfectly straight, despite the exhaustion clearly weighing on her fragile frame. "Send a guard to her," Aiden instructed. "Tell her I am waiting in the war room. And Corin?" "Yes, sire." "Make sure he says please." 10 minutes later, Sadie stood before the heavy oak doors of the garrison's strategic war room. The guard had been surprisingly polite, delivering a request rather than a command. She took a slow, deep breath, smoothing her coarse apron one last time. She touched the side of her boot to ensure the knife was still there. Then she pushed the heavy doors open and stepped into the firelight, ready to face the king on her own terms. The war room was warm, smelling of cedarwood, burning logs, and old parchment. When Sadi stepped inside, the heavy oak doors clicked shut behind her, sealing her in. The room was empty, except for the large strategic table in the center and Alpha King Aiden, who was standing by the hearth, staring into the flames. He had removed his heavy sword belt, placing it on the table. It was a silent, deliberate gesture of disarmament. He was telling her, without words, that she was safe in this room. Sadie stayed near the door. "You asked for me, Your Majesty." Aiden turned. The firelight cast sharp shadows across the angular planes of his face. He picked up a rolled parchment from the table and held it out to her. "Do you know how to read, Sadie?" It was a dangerous question. In the border villages, unranked omegas were explicitly forbidden from learning to read. It was a method of control, keeping them ignorant and dependent. Sadie kept her chin high. "I learned by watching the tavern keeper's ledgers. Yes, I can read." Aiden didn't look angry. If anything, the silver in his eyes seemed to brighten. He unrolled the parchment and laid it flat on the table, stepping back to give her space. "Tell me what you see." Sadie moved forward slowly, her steps silent on the stone floor. She looked down at the map. It was a detailed charting of the Veldrath territories, covered in red ink marks. Her eyes darted across the dates and locations. Her photographic memory, the hidden weapon she had relied on to survive the brutal tavern life, instantly connected the data points. "These are raids," Sadie said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "All in the last 2 years, all border villages, but they aren't taking resources. They are only hitting the poorest districts. They are taking unranked women," Aiden finished for her, his voice grim. "Women with no pack ties, no family name. Women the world considers invisible. Tell me, Sadie, why would Lord Cavan, a wealthy vassal lord, risk the crown's wrath to kidnap helpless omegas?" Sadie stared at the map. The gears in her mind turned with terrifying speed. Unranked omegas have no wolf signature. They can't communicate through a pack link. If they vanish, no one feels the bond break. No one comes looking for them. She looked up, meeting his intense gaze. "They aren't being taken for labor. They are being consumed." Aiden went completely still. It was the second time tonight she had shocked him. His top intelligence officers had taken months to piece together what this maid had deduced in less than a minute. "You have a brilliant mind," Aiden said quietly. "A mind that has been wasted washing floors." "What is Cavan doing to them?" Sadie demanded, ignoring the compliment. "Blood rituals," Aiden said, the words heavy with disgust. "He is working with a disgraced priest named Soren. They are trying to siphon alpha dominance, effectively trying to steal my throne. But wolf blood disrupts their dark magic. They need blood that is silent, human-leaning. They need women like you." Sadie felt a cold chill run down her spine. The missing girls. The empty holding cells. It all made horrifying sense. "I have an army that can crush Cavan's fortress in a day," Aiden continued, taking a slow step toward her. "But if my wolves cross his border, his dark magic perimeter will sense our signatures instantly. He will execute the remaining captives and burn the evidence before we even breach the gates. I cannot prove his treason to the Crown Tribunal without the ledger of the rituals. And I cannot get the ledger because my soldiers cannot get inside unseen." He stopped just a few feet away. The heat of the fire radiated behind him, but his eyes were entirely focused on her. "I need someone invisible," Aiden said softly. "Someone who has no wolf signature to trigger the alarms. Someone who can walk into a holding cell acting like terrified prey, but who has the mind of a military general to find the ledger and signal my army from the inside." The room went dead silent. Only the crackle of the fire broke the heavy tension. Sadie looked down at the map, then back up at the supreme Alpha King of the realm. He was asking her to walk back into the nightmare she had just escaped. He was asking an unranked maid with a tiny belt knife to infiltrate a fortress of murderous rogue wolves. "You want to use me as bait," Sadi said flatly. "I want to employ you as my operative," Aiden corrected, his tone fiercely serious. "There is a massive difference. You would go in with a signal crystal. You would know exactly what you are looking for. And the moment you give the signal, I will personally tear the gates of Cavern's Keep off their hinges." "And if I am caught before I find it?" she asked. "Then I will burn his territory to the ground to get you out." There was no hesitation in his voice, no political double talk. It was an absolute, terrifying vow. Sadi stood her ground. "I have spent my whole life being used by powerful men, Your Majesty. If I do this, if I risk my life to secure your throne, what do I get in return?" Aiden didn't flinch at her audacity. In fact, a deep, profound respect settled over his features. He liked that she bargained. He liked that she did not bow. "Anything you ask," he said simply. "I want official crown citizenship," Sadi stated, her voice ironclad. "I want the status of unranked abolished from my record. I want a house in the capital that belongs only to me. And I want your absolute guarantee that the women still inside that keep will not be collateral damage." Alpha King Aiden looked at the woman standing before him. She was wearing rags. She had bruises on her wrists. But in the flickering firelight, she did not look like a maid. She looked like a ruler. "Done," Aiden said. He extended his large, scarred hand toward her. Sadie looked at his hand. For the first time in 23 years, a ranked wolf was not raising a hand to strike her or push her aside. He was offering it in an equal pact. She reached out and gripped his hand. His skin was warm, his hold firm, but incredibly gentle, ensuring he didn't crush her fragile bones. The moment their skin touched, a strange electric jolt sparked through the air between them, making the king's breath catch slightly. "Tell me how to get inside," Sadi said, her eyes locked on his. The rain felt like freezing needles against Sadi's skin. She sat huddled in the corner of a wooden transport cart, pulling a thin, soaked cloak tightly around her shoulders. To the guards riding alongside the wagon, she was just another terrified runaway, a nameless Omega intercepted by Cavern's border patrols after the chaos at the tavern. They did not know that her capture had been meticulously orchestrated by the Alpha King himself. They did not know about the small, smooth signal crystal secured in a hidden pocket sewn into her coarse dress, or the belt knife still resting snugly in her boot. Looming ahead in the darkness was Cavern's Keep. It was a brutal structure built of jagged black stone, perched on the edge of a cliff like a vulture waiting for a meal. When the heavy iron gates ground open, the stench hit Sadi instantly. It wasn't just the smell of wet dog and stale ale she was used to at the tavern. It was the sharp metallic tang of old blood, mixed with the sickeningly sweet scent of burnt sulfur, the undeniable residue of dark magic. "Get out! Move!" A guard barked, striking the side of the cart with the flat of his blade. Sadi stumbled out, purposely letting her knees buckle slightly when she hit the mud. She kept her head down, her shoulders hunched. She performed the exact physical vocabulary of a broken, terrified prey. The enforcers laughed, dismissing her instantly. But beneath the act, her dark eyes were darting rapidly, recording everything. 4 watchtowers, 2 heavily armed guards at the inner keep entrance, a shift rotation every 2 hours, judged by the varying degrees of exhaustion on the men's faces. She and 3 other crying women were marched down a narrow, torch-lit stairwell into the dungeon levels. The air grew colder, damp with the breath of the mountain. They were shoved into a large iron-barred cell, and the heavy lock clicked shut with a sound like a closing coffin. "Rest up, little birds," a guard sneered, holding his torch near the bars. "Priest Sorin will want you fresh for the midnight blessing." He laughed, a cruel, hollow sound, and walked away, leaving them in near darkness. The other women collapsed onto the filthy straw, weeping softly. Sadi did not sit. She walked over to the iron bars, her hands gripping the cold metal, and waited. She counted the seconds. She listened to the dripping water. She memorized the fading rhythm of the guard's footsteps, until she knew exactly how far down the corridor the guard station was. She had less than 3 hours until midnight. Sadi reached into her boot and pulled out the small belt knife. She turned her back to the other women, shielding her movements, and slipped the thin blade into the old, rusted keyhole of the cell door. Years of working in a tavern with jammed pantry doors and locked liquor cabinets had taught her that iron was stubborn, but mechanical levers were simple. She worked in absolute silence, her hands perfectly steady despite the freezing temperature. With a soft click, the heavy locking mechanism disengaged. Sadi pushed the door open just wide enough to slip her fragile frame through. She pressed a finger to her lips, silently ordering the other women to stay put. If they ran now, they would all be slaughtered. She needed to blind the beast before they could escape its cage. She moved like a shadow through the underground corridors. Her photographic memory guided her back up the stairwell, bypassing the sleeping guard stationed at the midway landing. Aiden had told her the ledger would be kept close to the ritual room, likely in the chief administrator's quarters. Sadi slipped through a heavy wooden door into a large, circular chamber that smelled heavily of ink and candle wax. The room was opulent, a stark contrast to the dungeons below. And there, sitting on a massive oak desk, was a thick book bound in red leather. Sadie moved quickly. She opened the ledger. Her eyes scanned the pages, and a wave of pure nausea washed over her. It was a meticulous accounting of human lives, names, dates, and the amount of silent blood harvested to fuel the ritual that was slowly poisoning the king's territories. She had it, the undeniable proof of high treason. Her fingers trembled as she reached inside her dress, pulling out the small signal crystal. It was warm to the touch, carrying the faint, comforting energy of the Alpha King. All she had to do was press her thumb to its center, and Aiden's army would tear the sky apart. She pressed her thumb against the glass. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed on the stone floor right outside the chamber. They were not the slow, lazy steps of a guard. They were purposeful, heavy, and accompanied by the terrifying hum of dark magic. The brass handle of the door began to turn. The brass handle clicked. Sadie had a fraction of a second to react. She snatched the red leather ledger, shoved the signal crystal deep into her pocket before it could fully illuminate, and dove beneath the massive oak desk just as the heavy doors swung inward. She pulled her knees to her chest, pressing her back against the dark wood, making herself as small as humanly possible. She forced her breathing to slow, burying her face in the coarse fabric of her dress to muffle any sound. 2 pairs of boots entered the room. One stepped with the heavy, arrogant thud of a ranked warrior, Lord Cavan. The other glided silently, accompanied by the metallic clicking of a staff and the nauseating stench of sulfur. Priest Sorin. The preparations are nearly complete. Sorin's voice hissed, sounding like dry leaves scraping against stone. At midnight, the eclipse will peak. The unranked females in the holding cells will provide enough silent blood to break the Crown's warding over the southern territories. And the king? Cavan's deep voice rumbled with nervous ambition. Alpha King Aiden is powerful, but he is a slave to his military protocol, Sorin mocked. He will not march an army across your borders without absolute proof of treason. By the time he realizes what we have done, you will possess the dominance of a supreme alpha. The throne will be yours. Under the desk, Sadie gripped the red ledger so tightly her fingers ached. She was listening, memorizing every word, every admission of guilt. She was terrified, yes, but her mind remained a razor-sharp weapon, cataloguing the layout of their treason. But inside her pocket, the signal crystal was cold. She hadn't pressed it long enough to send a full beacon. Miles away, at the edge of the Veldrath border forest, the rain was coming down in sheets. Alpha King Aiden stood inside the command tent, his eyes fixed on the master crystal resting on the tactical map. Commander Corin and 3 senior lieutenants stood around him in tense silence. Suddenly, the master crystal flared. A faint, desperate pulse of blue light flickered deep within the glass, and then abruptly died. Corin frowned, leaning over the table. A micropulse. The connection was severed before a location could lock. She was interrupted, Aiden said. His voice was dangerously quiet, but the air in the tent instantly grew heavy. The shadows around the king seemed to lengthen, twisting with the agitated, barely contained fury of his wolf. Sire, standard protocol dictates we wait for a secondary confirmation signal, Corin advised cautiously, aware of the crushing aura leaking from his king. If we breach the perimeter now and it was a false trigger, Caven's magical wards will alert him. He will execute the hostages. Aiden stared at the dead crystal. He thought of Sadie, a fragile, unranked maid with no magic, holding a clay pitcher with trembling hands, but refusing to kneel. She was alone in the dark, surrounded by monsters, holding the line for a kingdom that had only ever treated her like dirt. His wolf snarled in his chest, violently rejecting the logic of military patience. "We do not wait," Aiden commanded, his silver eyes flashing with primal gold. He grabbed his broadsword from the table, strapping it to his waist. "She is in danger. We move now." "But sire, the wards." "I will shatter the wards myself," Aiden interrupted, his voice echoing with supreme authority. He looked at his commanders, his expression absolute. "Mount up. We are taking Caven's Keep." Back in the administrator's chamber, Sadie remained perfectly still. Caven and Sorin were moving toward the door. She had survived. They were leaving. But as the Alpha King's army began its relentless march across the border, the Master Crystal in Aiden's hand instinctively sent a faint, automatic pulse of reassurance back to its twin. In the pitch-black space beneath the desk, Sadie's pocket emitted a soft, undeniable glow of blue light. Sorin froze in the doorway. The dark priest slowly turned his head. His hollow, sunken eyes locked onto the faint blue glow, spilling onto the floorboards from beneath the oak desk. A cruel, twisted smile stretched across his face. "Lord Caven," Sorin whispered, raising his staff. "It seems a little mouse has found its way into the archives." The massive oak desk was ripped away with a violent surge of dark magic. It crashed into the far wall, splintering into pieces. Sadie was left kneeling on the bare floorboards, completely exposed to the harsh torchlight. Lord Caven drew his sword, a cruel sneer twisting his features, while Priest Sorin leveled his wooden staff at her chest. Most unranked Omegas would have screamed. They would have scrambled backward, curling into a ball, begging for a mercy that these men did not possess. Sadi did not crawl. With slow, deliberate movements, she stood up. She smoothed the dust from her coarse linen skirt, her spine perfectly straight. In her left hand, she held the red leather ledger. In her right hand, resting gently but firmly against the parchment pages, was the sharp steel of her belt knife. "Step back," Sadi said. Her voice did not shake. It was the same unhurried, commanding tone she had used to control the panic in the medical wing. Caven laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "An unranked maid giving orders in my keep. You have a death wish, little bird." "If I die, the ledger dies with me," Sadi replied evenly, pressing the blade just enough to slice through the cover. "This paper is old and dry. My knife is soaked in the oil I used to pick your rusted locks. One spark from that hearth, or one deep cut, and the complete record of your blood rituals is destroyed. You cannot usurp the Alpha King without the documented proof of the bloodline transfer. And you know it." Caven's laughter abruptly died. His eyes darted to the ledger. She was right. The ritual required exact celestial mapping and blood accounting. Without the book, years of treasonous preparation would be useless. "Who are you?" Soran hissed, his sunken eyes narrowing. The dark priest stepped forward, his staff glowing with a sickly green light. He unleashed a wave of pack dominance magic, a mental attack designed to crush the willpower of any lesser wolf, forcing them to submit. The heavy magical pressure hit Sadie square in the chest. She felt a cold wind wash over her skin, but nothing else happened. Her mind remained entirely her own. She blinked at the priest, unimpressed. "I am an unranked Omega, with no wolf," Sadie stated calmly. "Your pack magic only works on those who have a wolf to submit. You are trying to command an empty room, priest." Sorin's face twisted in pure outrage. His greatest weapon was useless against a woman the world considered defective. Her greatest flaw was, in this room, an impenetrable shield. "Grab her!" Caven roared, realizing the magic had failed. But before Caven could take a single step, the entire fortress shuddered. It was not a tremor of the earth. It was a massive, concussive boom that vibrated through the thick stone walls, shaking dust from the ceiling. A second boom echoed, louder this time, followed by the distant, terrifying sound of iron gates being torn apart. Sadie felt a familiar warmth flare against her leg. The signal crystal in her pocket was glowing brightly now. "What is that?" Caven demanded, looking toward the window. "That," Sadie said, a cold, fierce light finally entering her dark eyes, "is the Alpha King, and he is here for me." Panic erupted in the room. Caven rushed to the window, his face going pale as he looked out at the courtyard. "The wards, the perimeter wards are shattered. It's the royal army." "Forget the army! Get the ledger!" Soran shrieked, abandoning all pretense of control. He raised his staff, dark energy crackling violently at the tip, preparing to strike Sadie down with lethal force, ledger or not. Sadie braced herself, gripping the knife, refusing to close her eyes. If this was the end, she would face it standing. Soran lunged, and then the heavy stone wall of the chamber simply exploded. The wall did not just break, it disintegrated. A blinding cloud of pulverized black stone and mortar blasted into the chamber. The concussive force threw Priest Soran backward, his green magic sputtering out like a dying candle in a hurricane. Lord Caven shielded his face, coughing violently as the heavy oak door leading to the corridor was simultaneously kicked off its hinges by royal guards. Through the settling dust and swirling debris, Alpha King Aiden walked into the room. He did not rush. He did not roar. But his presence was an apocalyptic weight that immediately drove Cavan to his knees. The silver crown insignia at his collar caught the torchlight, but it was his eyes, glowing with the lethal, predatory silver of a fully awakened alpha, that commanded the space. Sorin scrambled to his feet, coughing up dust, lifting his staff in a desperate attempt to launch a defensive spell. Aiden didn't even draw his broadsword. He simply snapped his hand forward. The sheer kinetic force of his alpha aura slammed into the Dark Priest, shattering the wooden staff into splinters and pinning Soran against the far wall. The priest slid to the floor, unconscious before his body even hit the stone. Caven, shaking uncontrollably, raised his sword in a pathetic display of defiance. Commander Corrin stepped through the rubble, his own blade already drawn and leveled at Caven's throat. "Drop it, traitor, or I will take the arm attached to it." Caven's sword clattered to the floor. The great rebellion of the Veldrath border was over in less than 10 seconds. But Alpha King Aiden was not looking at the defeated lords. He walked straight through the wreckage, his heavy boots crushing the broken stone, until he reached Sadi. He stopped exactly 1 foot in front of her. He physically placed his massive frame between her and the rest of the room, shielding her from the sight of the prisoners, from the heavily armed royal guards, from the violence of the world. Sadie was still standing. Her coarse dress was covered in grey dust, her breathing shallow, but she still had the red leather ledger clutched tightly to her chest and her belt knife locked in her right hand. Aiden looked at the knife. Then he looked at her face. The terrifying, lethal coldness in his silver eyes melted, replaced by a profound, heavy relief that made his broad shoulders drop a fraction of an inch. "Are you bleeding?" he asked. His voice was a low rumble, meant only for her. "No," Sadie whispered. "Did they touch you?" "No." Aiden let out a slow, steady breath. He reached out, his large hands gently wrapping over her small, trembling ones. He didn't forcefully take the knife from her. He didn't issue a command. He just held her hands until she realized, deep in her bones, that she didn't need to fight anymore. Slowly, Sadie uncurled her fingers. The belt knife slipped from her grasp, clinking softly against the stone floor. "I have the ledger," she said, her voice finally wavering as the adrenaline began to crash. She held up the red book, offering it to him. "The proof. It's all here. Your throne is secure." Aiden didn't take the book. He looked at her, his expression stripping away every title and crown he wore. The throne, the treason, the kingdom, none of it mattered to him in that exact second. "I don't care about the ledger right now," Aiden said softly. He reached up, his thumb gently brushing a streak of black soot from her cheek. It was a gesture of such startling tenderness that Sadie's breath hitched in her throat. You held the line, Sadie. You did exactly what you promised. Now, let me do my job. He turned his head slightly, his voice returning to the ironclad authority of a supreme ruler. Commander Corrin. Yes, sire, Corrin answered, already binding Caven in heavy iron chains. Secure the prisoners. Gather the women from the holding cells and wrap them in my own guards' cloaks if you have to. We are leaving this rot behind. Aiden looked back at Sadie, offering his arm not as a king to a servant, but as a gentleman to an equal. It is time to bring these traitors to the light. The Crown Tribunal was a masterpiece of intimidation. Built from white marble and accented with silver banners, the massive circular hall was designed to make anyone standing in its center feel exceptionally small. The tiered seating rose high into the vaulted ceiling, packed entirely with ranked alphas, lunars, and the ancient elders of the Wolf Council. At the very front, seated on a throne of carved obsidian, was Alpha King Aiden. He wore the formal ceremonial robes of the crown, looking every inch the terrifying absolute ruler of the territories. Standing in the dead center of the marble floor, heavy iron chains binding his wrists and ankles, Lord Caven. Beside him stood Priest Sorin, stripped of his magical artifacts and heavily guarded by royal enforcers. And standing 10 paces away, near the witness podium, was Sadie. She was no longer wearing the coarse, dusty linen of a tavern maid. The king's tailors had provided her with a simple but elegant gown of midnight blue wool. Yet she wore no jewelry, no pack crest, and no rank insignia. To the whispers echoing around the massive hall, she was still a glaring anomaly, an unranked, scentless omega standing in the most sacred political arena of the kingdom. This is a farce, Lord Caven's voice boomed, attempting to project the authority he no longer possessed. He looked up at the council elders. You are condemning a high-born vassal lord based on the testimony of a tavern rat. A girl with no wolf, no rank, and no understanding of our sacred laws. An uncomfortable murmur rippled through the gallery. Several of the older, more conservative wolves nodded in agreement. Yes. The strict hierarchy of their world made it difficult to accept an unranked word over an alpha's. The red ledger was found in my study, yes, Caven sneered, sensing the hesitation in the room. But it is a forgery, planted there by my political rivals and carried out by this peasant. She cannot even read the high text of the Moon Temple. Ask her. All eyes turned to S, Addy. The heavy, oppressive silence of 1,000 judgmental wolves crashed down on her. It was the same kind of pressure that used to make her hide in the tavern kitchens. But as she looked up at the obsidian throne, Alpha King Aiden did not look worried. He sat perfectly relaxed, his silver eyes resting on her with absolute, unwavering trust. He wasn't going to step in and save her. He was giving her the floor. Sadie took a deep breath. She stepped away from the wooden podium, moving directly into the open space between Cavern and the throne. I am unranked, Sadie's voice rang out. It was not loud, but the acoustics of the marble hall carried her steady, unhurried tone to the very last row. I have no wolf to guide my instincts, but I do have my mind. She turned her gaze to the High Elder. The ledger, bound in red leather, contains exactly 412 pages, Sadie stated, her voice crystalline in the quiet hall. On page 84, Lord Cavan documented the abduction of 3 Omegas from Ashvan village, dated the night of the blood moon. On page 112, Priest Sorin notes the transfer of 700 gold pieces to the Mercenary Guild for silent cargo. Cavan's face paled. Sadie didn't stop. She didn't look at the book. She looked directly at the council. On page 203, the celestial alignment for the dominance transfer ritual, Al, is mapped. It requires the sacrifice of 12 unranked females precisely when the eclipse shadows the southern peak of the Veldrath Mountains, which occurred 2 nights ago. You claim it is a forgery, Lord Cavan. Sadie took a step toward him. Cavan instinctively flinched. The ledger is written in a cipher, Sadie continued, her dark eyes locking onto the traitor. A cipher that shifts every 5 pages based on the lunar cycle. A peasant could not forge that. And your political rivals do not know that on page 300, you specifically noted your intention to betray Priest Sorin once the king's throne was yours. Sorin's head snapped toward Cavan, a look of pure, venomous betrayal crossing his sunken face. Cavan's mouth opened, but no words came out. The Crown Tribunal erupted. Shouts of outrage and horror echoed off the marble walls. The elders, realizing the sheer depth of the treason and the undeniable brilliance of the woman reciting it from memory, began slamming their gavels to restore order. Through the chaos, Alpha King Aiden finally stood up. The movement was simple, but the effect was instantaneous. The hall fell into a deathly, terrifying silence. Aiden did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. The evidence is absolute, Aiden declared, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the chest of every wolf present. The testimony of this witness is flawless, said Lord Cavan. You are stripped of your title, your lands, and your pack name. You and Sorin will spend the rest of your mortal lives in the Black Iron Prison. Remove them from my sight. Cavan collapsed to his knees, begging, but the royal enforcers dragged him backward out of the hall. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut, sealing his fate. The king remained standing. He looked down at the council, at the nobles who had just spent the last hour whispering insults about the woman in the center of the room. For centuries, this court has measured a person's worth by the magic in their blood and the strength of their wolf. Aiden said, his tone chillingly calm. We have allowed the unranked to be treated as invisible, as disposable cargo. That ends today. Aiden descended the marble stairs of the throne. The entire hall watched in stunned silence as the supreme ruler of the territories walked down to the floor, stopping right in front of Sadie. A crown does not make a ruler, Aiden said, loud enough for the entire court to hear. And a wolf does not make a hero. This woman stood in the dark, without magic, without claws, and held the line against monsters. She secured my throne. He turned to face the council. If anyone in this room ever looks down upon her again, they will answer directly to me. The High Elder, an ancient wolf of immense pride, slowly stood from his seat. He looked at Sadie, truly looked at her, and then, with profound respect, he bowed his head. Following his lead, the nobles in the first row bowed, then the second. Like a wave of cascading obedience, the entire Crown Tribunal, the most powerful alphas and lunars in the realm, lowered their heads in absolute submission to the unranked maid who had refused to break. The fire in the war room was burning low, casting a warm, golden glow over the heavy oak table. It was the exact same room where Sadie had first bargained with the Alpha King. But everything else had changed. Outside these walls, the entire capital was still whispering about the unranked Maid who had brought a vassal lord to his knees and made the Crown Tribunal bow. Sadie stood by the hearth, staring into the flames. She was exhausted, but for the first time in 23 years, it wasn't the exhausting weight of survival. It was the quiet, profound exhaustion of having finally arrived. The heavy doors clicked open. Alpha King Aiden walked in. He had removed the heavy ceremonial robes of the tribunal, wearing only his simple, dark levers. He looked tired too, but as his silver eyes found her by the fire, the hard lines of his face softened into something entirely unguarded. He walked to the table and picked up a sealed parchment. He held it out to her. Sadie took it slowly. She broke the royal wax seal and read the elegant script. It was an official decree, signed by the Supreme Alpha King himself. It granted her full crown citizenship. It explicitly abolished the title of unranked from her name, and it deeded her a quiet, secure estate in the heart of the capital. "The women from the holding cells are safe," Aiden said quietly, leaning against the edge of the table. "They have been given sanctuary and stipends to rebuild their lives. Every term of our negotiation has been met." Sadie traced the ink on the parchment. "I am free then. My service to the crown is concluded." "Your service is concluded," Aiden agreed. His voice was low, carrying that familiar, unhurried certainty. "You are free to walk out of these doors, Sadie. You have a home. You have protection. No one in this realm will ever treat you as invisible again." Sadie looked up from the paper, but a faint smile touched the corner of Aiden's mouth. "But I would very much prefer it if you stayed." He pushed off the table and took a slow step toward her. He didn't crowd her space. He didn't unleash his crushing alpha aura. He simply stood before her as a man looking at the only person in the world who truly understood him. "I have commanded armies for a decade," Aiden said, his silver eyes locking onto hers. "I have sat on a throne made of cold stone, surrounded by people who only respect the violence I can inflict or the magic in my blood. And then you walked into a broken tavern, holding a clay pitcher, and refused to kneel." Sadie's breath hitched slightly, but she didn't. "I'd look away." "You don't have a wolf, Sadie," Aiden continued, reaching out. His large, calloused fingers gently brushed a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. "And I have never been more grateful. Because the mind you possess, the quiet, terrifying strength you carry, it is more powerful than any magic I have ever seen." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, flawless silver band. It wasn't the heavy, jeweled crown of a Luna. It was something far more personal. A promise. "I don't want an operative anymore," Aiden whispered, his voice vibrating with raw, unfiltered emotion. "I want my equal. Stay with me, Sadie. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because this is where you belong." Sadie looked at the silver ring resting in his scarred palm. She thought about the cold floor of the tavern kitchen. She thought about the endless nights spent calculating escape routes, hiding knives in her boots and expecting the world to strike her down. She had built herself from scarcity, piece by broken piece. And now, a king who had seen all those broken pieces was telling her she was a masterpiece. Sadie reached out. She didn't take the ring. Instead, she placed her hand directly over his heart, feeling the steady, powerful rhythm of his pulse beneath the dark leather. "I belong to no one," Sadie said softly, her dark eyes shining in the firelight. "But I will choose you. Every single day I will choose you." Aiden's eyes closed for a fraction of a second, a breath of absolute relief escaping his chest. When he opened them, the silver glow was entirely gone, replaced by a deep, human warmth. He slid the silver band onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He stepped closer, wrapping his arms around her waist, and pulled her into his chest. Sadie buried her face in his shoulder, inhaling the scent of cedar and rain. She let her eyes close, the last remnants of her lifelong tension finally melting away into the warmth of the fire. She didn't need to check her boot for a knife anymore. She didn't need to calculate the distance to the door.